off in the Council of Elrond. We just started it. So we're going to finish. We're not actually as far behind as I thought we were, because we have 2 days next week that we can do for Two Towers, and then 2 days after that for Return of the King. So we're going to pick up on, if you brought your book, 242, which I hope you have, where Elrond kind of kicks off the beginning of the council. And he says to everybody, this is after Glóin speaks and tells them about the emissary they've received from Sauron 3 times now, asking for this least of rings, this trifle that Sauron wants. And Elrond says to all those assembled, you've done well to come. You will hear today all that you need in order to understand the purposes of the enemy. There is naught that you can do other than to resist, with hope or without it. But you do not stand alone. Now he's speaking specifically here to Glóin, but then he's going to address everybody, because he says, you do not stand alone. Those that are with him, that is, in the council, Elrond is implying, we will stand with you. You will learn that your trouble is but part of the trouble of all the Western world. Okay? Now, when the novel was first published, many readers, I won't say a lot, many readers assumed, are but part of the problem of the trouble of the Western world. They heard that language, Western world, and they thought, our world, east-west. Okay? Iron Curtain, and in the west. The ring. What shall we do with the ring? The least of rings, the trifle that Sauron fancies. That is the doom that we must deem. And then last week, I believe it was, or the other day, we talked about those 2 words, doom and deem, and how Elrond is using them. So he says, that is the purpose for which you are called hither. Called, I say, though I have not called you to me, strangers from distant lands. You have come and are here met in this very nick of time, by chance as it may seem. Yet it is not so. Why does Elrond say it's not chance? Is it mere coincidence that Glóin and Gimli show up, that Legolas shows up, that Galdor shows up, that Frodo and the other hobbits show up, that Gandalf shows up, all at the same time? No. He's implying, as Gandalf said about Frodo's ownership of the ring, there's another power at work. Okay? Believe, rather, notice he doesn't say no. Believe, rather, that it is so ordered that we who sit here and none others must now find counsel for the peril of the world. In other words, we've got to determine what is going to happen to all of Middle-earth. It's in their hands. So he says, now things are going to be said in the open that haven't been talked about at all. So he starts. And Elrond tells them of kind of the ages of Middle-earth and the great struggle that's been going on seemingly from the beginning. He talks about the last alliance between elves and men. He talks about the fall of Númenor or Westernessa. He talks about the last time they had a great battle against Sauron. He was there. He tells them about how Isildur cut the ring from Sauron's finger and then kept it. And Frodo interrupts him on page 243. He says, you remember, but I thought that the fall of Gil-galad was a long age ago. Elrond. So it was, but my memory reaches back even to the elder days. And he gives us his genealogy. He says, Eärendil was my sire. That's the same Eärendil whose name is inspired when Tolkien read that Old English verse I mentioned the first day of class. I think it was the first day of class. Where he read the Old English Advent lyric that has the line, Eala Eärendil, Lo Eärendil, which is, in Old English means the morning star. That clicks something in Tolkien's mind, and he creates this character, Eärendil, who's called the Mariner. Okay? Eärendil was my sire. or Earendil, was my sire, who was born in Gondolin before its fall. So we have Elrond, Earendil. My mother was Elwing, daughter of Dior, okay, son of Luthien of Doriath. So you have Elrond, Elwing, his mother, Dior, Beren and Luthien. So Beren and Luthien were his great-great-grandparents. Gives you an idea of how old Elrond is. All right? He says, I was there when Isildur cut the ring, and then he took it for his own. Boromir didn't chime in. So that's what happened to the ring. All right? Elrond goes on, talks about what happened. All right? And he says, far in the north, he talks about the men of Western Essos gradually were diminished. In the south, he talks about Gondor, how Gondor has kind of been a bulwark against, Mordor and such. But he kind of says, even down there in the south, even its strength is waning. Boromir doesn't really like this. So on 245, Boromir interrupts, and he says, let me speak for Boromir. For Gondor. And so he talks about how we, Gondorians, have essentially protected all of the West. We've kept Sauron bottled up, let's say. All right? Pardon? That's 245. All right? And then on 246, he says why, in particular, he has come. And he mentions the dream that his brother had. Okay? And how the dream came to his brother again, and then it came to him. And he says, I was sent here to get an answer to this riddle. Here's the riddle, or poem if you want. Seek for the sword that was broken, in Imladris it dwells. There shall be counsels taken, stronger than Morgul spells. There shall be shown a token that doom is near at hand, for Isildur's bane shall awaken, and the halfling forth shall stand. And Aragorn stands up and throws his broken sword on the table. There's the sword, he says. Here is the sword that was broken. Okay? It still is, right? I mean, it's in pieces. He says that was broken because that's what the poem said. It says, this is the sword that poem is referring to. Now, put this in our world kind of terms. Okay? What does that mean? What sword would this be in our world? This would be Excalibur. Okay? How long has it been since there's been a king in Gondor? A couple thousand years. See, Boromir is of the line of stewards. Because there's not a king, there's a steward in charge. The stewards have been in charge for a couple of thousand years. So Aragorn throws the sword down and says, there's the sword that was broken. Boromir, well, who the hell are you? He immediately challenges Aragorn. Who are you? Looking in wonder at the lean face of the ranger and his weather-stained cloak. Does Aragorn, like he does with the hobbits, stand up taller and do what he's going to do later in the second part of the novel, the Two Towers? Stand and rattle off his genealogy? I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn. Elisar, Dunedain, Elfstone am I called. Heir of Isildur, Elendil's son. He does that in the Two Towers. And everybody kind of backs up and looks down. Elrond comes to his defense. He is Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and he is descended through many fathers from Isildur, Elendil's son of Minas Ithil, chief of the Dunedain in the north. Why is it significant or important that Elrond comes to his defense?
I think if Aragorn said that to him, he may not have believed him.
Okay.
It has a sense of credibility coming from a really old and powerful person like Elrond.
One of the wisest and possibly most powerful people in Middle-earth, or at least elves in Middle-earth. Is anybody going to challenge Elrond? No, Elrond, that's really not true. You don't know. Nobody's going to second guess Elrond. Okay? Frodo then chimes in, it's yours. That is, the ring belongs to you. No, who does the ring belong to? Who is the Lord of the Rings? Sauron. It's only Sauron. Tolkien, by the way, did not intend, when he first wrote this, that wasn't the title he chose. That was the title the publisher chose. Stanley Unwin. Tolkien's title of it was actually The War of the Ring. Okay? Because The Lord of the Rings makes it sound like it's all about Sauron. Okay? So, Aragorn says, nope, doesn't belong to either of us. It's a nice way of saying, nice try there, Frodo. Not mine either. So Gandalf says, hold up the ring. So Frodo probably stands on a chair or something so everybody can see him, holds up the ring. Elrond, behold Isildur's bane, page 247. And Boromir's eyes glint. Now, nearly always when somebody's eyes glint, I'll take this back. Always when somebody's eyes glint, it means one of two things. One, either that person is immediately filled with desire or envy. They want what it is they're seeing. Or two, there's anger involved. Okay? We're told back in the first chapter when Bilbo and Gandalf are talking, and Bilbo's saying, I'm going to keep the ring. We're told at one point, he says something to Gandalf, and Gandalf's eyes glinted. Why? Because Bilbo implied, actually I think he says outright, if you want the ring, why don't you take it? That kind of angers Gandalf. Okay? Usually what it implies, though, is there's some evil desire awakened in the part of the person whose eyes are glinting. Boromir's eyes glinted. And he says, the halfling. This is the halfling the poem talked about. So is then the doom of Minas Tirith at hand? Notice how he interprets the little poem, the little riddle. Doom is near at hand, is what the line says. Aragorn corrects him. He says, the words were not the doom of Minas Tirith, but doom and great deeds. Doom, judgment, is at hand. For a lot of folks. Sauron not the least. Okay? So, he goes on and says, the sword that was broken is the sword of Elendil that broke when he fell. And then he asks, what do you want, Boromir? Do you wish for the house of Elendil to return to the land of Gondor? What does that mean? How long has Gondor been without a king? I said earlier. A couple thousand years at least. Okay? He's saying, do you want a king, I'm not even going to say the king, a king to return? What does that mean for Boromir and his family? His father, his brother, and any children he might have.
Right now I'm down to number 2.
Stewards aren't needed when the king's around. So, do you stewards want the king to return? Do you want somebody else to hold the reins of power? Okay. Again, put this in our world context. We've never had kings in the United States. Britain hasn't had a king. They've had a queen. But Britain hasn't had a king since about 1946. A little bit later than that. But even that's not quite the same. George VI is not Aragorn. What king, if you were to transfer this to our world, what king would be returning? Arthur. That's exactly it. Okay? In the Arthurian myth, Arthur's not dead. He's just off in Avalon waiting. He's waiting for England, or by its original Celtic name, Logres, to have its greatest need. So it didn't have its greatest need during the Blitz of 1940 and 1941 during the Second World War. It didn't have its greatest need during World War I. In other words, Arthur over there in Avalon, if he could see what's going on, said, nah, not time yet. They don't need me yet. Okay. But even then, if we're talking about Arthur, if Arthur was a real person, and a lot of us kind of think he was, that gets blown into this great myth, he lived in the early 400s. That's not even 2,000 years ago. That's 1,600 years ago. All right? So, do you want us to return? I was not sent to beg any boon, but to seek only the meaning of a riddle. But, if the sword of Elendil could return, yeah, that'd be handy. Notice the sword, not the son of Elendil. Okay? Bilbo's had enough. He stands up. Boromir says, by the way, we are hard-pressed, and the sword of Elendil would be a help beyond our hope. If such a thing could indeed return out of the shadows of the past. What does he mean, the shadows of the past? Louder? Hiding? What else?
Lost.
Louder?
Lost.
Lost? Okay, the past is obviously...
He's referring to like the ownership of the return out of the ownership of the kings and back to he wants the sword for himself in a sense.
I don't think he means that necessarily by this line. Shadows of the past. The past is how long? It's yesterday. It's a minute ago. And how far back does it go?
How long?
All the way. Okay? So what does he mean, shadows? Yesterday's pretty clear, right? 2 days ago is pretty clear. A year ago is relatively clear. But you start going more than 5 or 10. You start going 100, 200, 300, 500, 1,000. And what happens to your vision the farther back you go?
It's almost non-existent.
The dimmer and dimmer, the more shadowy it becomes. All right? It's not an accident Tolkien uses this line, because what was the title of the second chapter? Shadow of the Past. And Gandalf is doing what to those shadows in his conversation with Frodo in that chapter? Shining light on it. He's dispersing the shadows. Okay? It's almost as if Boromir is kind of saying, that stuff that happened thousands of years ago, what kind of phrase do we use for things that we're not necessarily sure happened, and yet everybody says they actually happened? They are what? Wives' tales? Fairy tales? Folk tales? Did George Washington really chop down a tree and lie about it? Okay. So Bilbo jumps up and he recites the lines he says he wrote about Aragorn. And then Aragorn says to Boromir, I forgive your doubt. Little do I resemble the figures of Elendil and Isildur as they stand carven in their majesty in the halls of Denethor. I am but the heir of Isildur, not Isildur himself. Heir. So Arathorn was my father, and his father was, and his father was, and his father was, like the opening of the Gospel of Matthew. Big, long genealogy. Okay? And his father was, he's saying, I am a copy of 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 a copy. And you could probably go, 40 or 42 generations, like you do in Matthew, to get back to Isildur. Aragorn is also saying, oh, by the way, I've been at your house. The halls of Denethor, that's where Boromir grew up. See, Aragorn at this point, how old is he? 87. How old's Boromir? We don't know exactly. I mean, you do if you go back and read the appendices and find the dates. But he's probably, he's probably around 30 or so. Not much older than that. He's not married. Because his brother is 20, 25. Right? Aragorn is older than Denethor. So when he says, I don't look like those carven statues, he's probably suggesting, I've seen those statues. I saw those statues before your father was even born. The reason he's so old, and yet he only looks like he's 40, is because he has the true blood of Westernessa in his veins. Okay? So, he goes on and says, you know, Gondor is just a small part in my travels. Because Boromir talked about, you know, I traveled something like 120 leagues to get here. Woohoo! All by myself. And Aragorn, you could turn to the map at the back of the book, and Aragorn says, I've been even into the far countries of Rhun, R-H-U-N, which is all the way at the eastern part of the map of Middle-earth. In other words, I've been near where the map would say in the Middle Ages, here be dragons, terra incognita. And he says, and I've been all the way as far down in the south as the map goes, and he says in both those countries where there are strange stars. Okay? Don't talk to me about how far you've traveled, Boromir. But he says, my home, it's in the north. And then he says, you know, Gondor's been a stalwart champion. It has protected the west. He says, but me and my people, the Rangers of the North, what have we done? Bottom of 248. You know little of the lands beyond your bounds. Peace and freedom, do you say? Because Boromir said, if it weren't for us, all you folks behind us wouldn't have any peace and freedom. The North would have known them little but for us. Fear would have destroyed them. But when dark things come from the houseless hills or creep from sunless woods, they fly from us. What roads would any dare to tread? What safety would there be in quiet lands, or in the homes of simple men at night, if the Dunedain were asleep, or were all gone into the grave? You say you protect, no, you only protect down there in the south, Boromir. We're the ones who protect the north, and guess what? We don't do it with walls. We don't do it with a massive army. And yet less thanks have we than you. Travelers scowl at us, and countrymen give us scornful names. Strider I am to one fat man who lives within a day's march of foes that would freeze his heart. He's talking about Bartram and Butterbur. Who were the foes that would freeze his heart? Are they orcs from the Misty Mountains? Well, the Misty Mountains is a little bit more than a day's march. What do we know is within a day's march? The Barrow. Okay. Even Old Man Willow is within a day's march. And there are other things. Or lay his little town in ruin if he were not guarded ceaselessly. Yet we would not have it otherwise. We, the Rangers of the North, we don't mind if they call us names. Okay, look at that next sentence. If simple folk are free from care and fear, simple they will be, and we must be secret to keep them so. If simple folk are free from care and fear, then simple they will be. That is, if simple, non- or uncomplex people are free from fear and danger and cares, then they will remain simple. He doesn't mean stupid. He doesn't mean simple-minded. He means common, ordinary, going about their daily lives without having to worry about the outside. And he says, and as long as they don't have to worry about the outside, guess what? They will remain simple and without any problems, other than the little problems of their day-to-day lives. And notice he says, and that's what we want to keep them. We must be secret to keep them so. We must be secret. We can't go blaring in their towns. The only reason you have peace and freedom is because of us. Why? Because then they will know about the dangers that lurk outside, and they will no longer be simple. they will no longer be free from care. He's kind of saying it's because of us that, for example, the Shire has its innocence and looks almost perfect. I mean, what problems did Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin, Bilbo before them, have in the Shire?
The Sackville Baggins is trying to get.
Sackville Baggins is, the SBs, by the way. Catch that little. Okay. What else? Sam getting in arguments with Ted Sandyman at the pub. Woohoo! Really big there.
Getting drunk and falling off a boat.
Getting drunk, falling off a boat. I mean, stupidity happens. Okay. But nothing that's going to completely blow your mind. Monday is the anniversary of 9/11. 9/10, most Americans, like 329,990,000, okay, thought we're impregnable. Nothing can happen to us here. Until somebody got the bright idea of turning a 747 into a missile. Okay? That kind of shattered that illusion of, the Pax Americana, the American peace. He goes on and says, that has been the task of my kindred, while the years have lengthened and the grass has grown. Our task has been what? For all the peoples of the north, to stand with our backs to them, to the people of Bree, the people of Hobbiton, the people of Buckleberry, the people not in incorporated areas, so to speak. Our job has been our backs to them, and what? Our sword held out. Our spears at the ready. In other words, Aragorn is saying, I and the other rangers have all stood sentinel, so that Bilbo and all the other hobbits didn't have to. Now, I think this is Tolkien's war experience coming through. He is essentially saying, we, English, especially rural English, Oxford was fairly rural still in the 1940s and 50s, we are safe here at home. Why? Because there are people today, 27,000 troops or so, as an example, stationed in South Korea. We are here safe today because there are people at air bases, on naval ships, around the world. But he says, but the world's changing now. A new hour comes. Isildur's bane is found. Battle is at hand. The sword shall be reforged. I will come to Minas Tirith. Is he saying, I will come in glory? I will come in my kingly robes? No, he's just saying, I'm coming and I'm carrying a big stick. And the stick seemingly has power and such. Boromir says, how do I know this is really Isildur's bane? Elrond says, don't worry, it will all be explained. So Bilbo tells his tale, how he came by the ring and all that. And they talk about Gollum. Gandalf tells his tale. And he describes his researches for the ring. And then he reads what is inscribed on the ring. But he doesn't read it the way he read it at Frodo's house. He reads it in what's called the Black Tongue of Mordor, page 254. Ashnaz Gdirbatulek, Ashnaz Gimbatul, Ashnaz Thrakatulek, Agburzum Ishi Krimpatul. And it's like, it's a nice sunny day out. The windows are open, the light's shining in, there's a breeze, and he starts reciting that, and the sun goes behind a cloud, and it gets dark and damp and dreary. And Elrond's like, Gandalf, what the hell, man? Nobody's ever said any word from that language here. Gandalf replies, let's hope no one ever does again. Because if they do, why are they going to be doing it? Because Sauron will have won. Okay? He says, this is the ring that Gollum found, that Bilbo found. And Legolas kind of goes, got some bad news. Gollum escaped. You know, we're nice elves. We don't like seeing anything chained or, bound. And we had to let him out for the bathroom. He scampered. Right? So Gandalf continues on with his account. And he talks about how he was captured by Saruman, which is a grievous blow because Saruman's a very powerful wizard. And he says, page 259, we're spending a lot of time on the Council of Elrond because we're going to skip a whole lot after this. He talks about how Saruman takes him up to the top of his tower and how he belittles Radagast. And he says, for I, top of 259, am Saruman the Wise, Saruman Ringmaker. Okay, that's a dead giveaway, not a good thing. Saruman of many colors. Gandalf says, and I looked, and what I thought was a white gown, cloak, whatever, robes, was actually multicolored. And when he moved, it shimmered. I liked white better, Gandalf says. White. It serves as a beginning. White cloth may be dyed, in which case what? It's no longer white, right? The white page can be overwritten, in which case it's no longer white. And the white light can be broken. All the colors that we have come from various wavelengths of white. That's why if I were to bring a prism in, put it here, turn off all the lights, cut the shades, shine a flashlight with a focus beam through it, over there on the wall you'd see the colors of the rainbow. Right? Gandalf. In which case it is no longer white. And he that breaks a thing to find out what it is has left the path of wisdom. If in order to find out what something is, you take it apart, that's not very wise. Would you know what this thing is? If you came in on Tuesday and I had all the parts just laying down here. No, you wouldn't. Okay? That's not a smart thing to do. Tolkien, I think, is also applying this to things like literature, stories, poems. You've probably had a class at some point in your life, more than likely high school, where you were assigned a poem and you had to take it apart. Word by word, line by line, meter, rhyme, etc. Well, what happens when you do that? If you take it all apart, what are you left with? A jumble of words. If you try to understand the Lord of the Rings simply by taking it entirely apart, what were all the sources for Tolkien? What were all the elements that became the Lord of the Rings? What do you end up with? A list of ingredients. You do not end up with this. Okay? So, Saruman imprisons him. He tries to get Gandalf to go along with him. He says, hey, you know what? You and I, we could take the ring. And we could rule together. Gandalf's like, really? How's that going to work out? How are you going to stick two fingers in one ring? What, you get it on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I get it Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, and we'll leave it on the shelf on Sunday. He says, okay, you're right. Well, then let's join with Sauron. And maybe after a while, we can turn him to our point of view. He's writing this in the 40s. That kind of idea was American foreign policy. Well, it still is American foreign policy, with a lot of pretty nasty, bad regimes. China, for example. We used to have, up until, I think somewhere during George Bush's reign, the second George Bush, we used to have what was called most favored nation trading status. And for China, that had to be voted on every year by Congress, whether or not we were going to grant MFN to China. And there were always pretty significant members of Congress who would say, no, we shouldn't. Why? Because China is horrible on human rights. And it is horrible on human rights. They're still horrible on human rights. They still publicly kill a variety of people. Christians, for example. They take them, I can send you the articles, have literally with asphalt thingies paved people into roads. Okay? In the last 5 years. The idea is, yeah, but if we keep trade going with China, if we keep diplomatic relations, maybe we can gradually get them to be less horrible. Hasn't worked. Okay? But that's the argument Saruman's using. Gandalf's like, ain't gonna work. Why? Lord Acton said it back in the 1900s. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Okay? Sauron has absolute power. Well, near. So, Gandalf talks about how he's rescued by Gwaihir the Windlord. And says his story up until when he arrived at Rivendell. Okay? So, Frodo and them talk about, or then give their tale, and we find out about Tom Bombadil. Again, I mean, we've already seen Tom Bombadil. Page 265. Arestor says, back up. Elrond says, I'd forgotten about Tom Bombadil. Middle of that page. If indeed this is the same that walked the woods and hills long ago, and even then was older than the old. His name, by the way, that Elrond calls him by, Earwain ben Adar. Ben Adar, it's very Hebrew, by the way. Ben means son of. Adar means earth. Son of the earth. Like a earth god. Okay. He says, I should have summoned him to our council. Did he summon anybody else? No. Everybody else came of their own. Aristor says, maybe we can send messages to him. Maybe he has a power over the ring. Gandalf, no, not really. Say rather that the ring has no power over him. He is his own master. But he can't alter the ring nor break its power over others. And he's withdrawn into his little lands. Aristor says, well, wouldn't he take the ring and keep it? Gandalf, no, not willingly. We might be able to persuade him, but then what would he do? He'd be dancing, tripping off along, someday singing, playing with the ring, and he'd lose it. Then it's in danger. So, what are the other suggestions that people offer for doing with the ring?
Bring it into the sea.
Yep. Glorfindel says, 2 things. Send it over the sea or destroy it. Elrond says, yeah, but Gandalf says we can't destroy it, other than taking it to Mount Doom. And those over the sea, they wouldn't take it. Why? It's not their problem. It's not their problem. You try to send this to the gods, it gets sent back, return to sender. Not our problem. Glorfindel says, okay, then let's throw it in the ocean. Let the ocean take it. Gandalf, wouldn't be safe forever. Because what happens? Something will go down to the bottom of the ocean, pick it up, and take it closer to the shore. And it eventually would wash upon the shore and be discovered again. He says no. Page 266. It is not our part here to take thought only for a season, or for a few lives of men, or for a passing of the age of the world. We should seek a final end of this menace. It's our job. It's our duty to solve this problem once and for all. Is it their job to solve all problems? Is it their job to end evil as they know it? No. It's to solve the evil that they know. All right? So, they determined, page 267, we must send the ring to the fire. And there's silence. Notice nobody goes, I will do it. Boromir doesn't say, well, this is going to take a mighty stalwart man. Let me go. Nope. He does say, this is lunacy. The men of Gondor are valiant, and they will never submit, page 267, but they may be beaten down. Valor needs first strength and then a weapon. Let the ring be your weapon. Take it and go forth to victory. See, this is one of the reasons a lot of people understood the ring in 1955 as being atomic weapons. If you can create something that will defeat your enemy, create it. Do it. Elrond can't. It belongs to Sauron, was made by him alone, and is altogether evil. Altogether means what?
There's no good.
Entirely. It was created with evil intent. Okay? Now, some of you are probably going to disagree with me. Minuteman missiles, okay, cruise missiles that are topped with a nuclear warhead, are they intentionally, are they designed for evil purposes? Now, you might say, well, they're designed to kill, therefore they are evil. Are they designed to kill indiscriminately, wantonly? Are they just designed to, hey, let's see what happens when you press this button? No, they're not. Okay? The original intent, if you want, is what? Defensive. Okay? Even the crazy little fat guy in North Korea, defensive in idea. Okay? That's the difference between any kind of weapon that we have in our world, other than germ warfare, biological warfare, chemical warfare. I mean, when you're brewing up anthrax, that only has one purpose. That's offensive. Because you can't deploy anthrax in your own town to protect you, right? What is it automatically going to do? It's going to start killing you, okay? So he says, its strength, Boromir, is too great for anyone to wield at will, save only those who have already a great power of their own. In other words, okay, maybe the great can wield it, like me, Gandalf, Aragorn possibly, Glorfindel. But he says, but even for them, it holds a deadlier peril. Deadlier peril. The very desire of it corrupts the heart. Saruman's example. He says, I won't take the ring. Not because I'm not strong enough, because I'm too weak. Gandalf says, nope, me either. Okay. So, they keep talking. Page 269. Aristor says, so we come back to the destroying of the ring. What strength have we for the finding of the fire in which it was made? How are we going to march into Mordor and find the fire? In other words, we don't have enough troops to do that. That is the path of despair. In other words, what does despair mean? Literally, D means out of or away from, and despair comes from space, Latin. It means hope. Out of hope. Away from hope. It is hopeless. Gandalf. Despair or folly? It's not despair. Because despair is only for those who see the end beyond all doubt. You can only have true despair if you see what? How it's completely going to end. I mean, think of the people that have been reading about, Hurricane Irma. Think of the people on the little Caribbean island of Barbuda, which is destroyed. Apparently there is no habitation left. And it had about 1,800 people. We don't know if they got off or not. Okay? But even those 1,800 people, if some of them were on the island, and they were watching satellite imagery of Irma coming towards them, should they have been filled with despair? No. They might not have had much hope, but there was always that little bit of hope that they could live through it because they couldn't see the other side. See, no one can see the future perfectly. No one. Okay? So Gandalf's saying, It's not despair. He says, it might be foolish. In other words, it might be really stupid to march into hell to take Satan what he wants and pretend you're going to be able to destroy it. He says, we do not see beyond all doubt. It's wisdom to recognize necessity. Well, what's the necessity? We've got the ring. He wants it. We can't let him get it. We have to destroy it. There's only one way to do that. Knock on his door and ask if he could lead us to the fire. Okay? So, how do you do that? Bilbo goes, okay, I see where you're getting at. I'll take it. No, Bilbo, shut up. Sit down. Put your hearing aid back in. So, the question becomes, who will take the ring? And Elrond says, there will be messengers, there will be people going with, and there's silence. And finally Frodo goes, I'll take it. Though I do not know the way. Bottom of 270. Elrond says, if I understand aright all that I have heard, I think that this task is appointed for you, Frodo. Appointed means there has to be what? An appointer. It's not me. I'm not telling you to do this, Frodo. If you don't find a way, no one will. This is the hour of the Shire folk when they arise from their quiet fields to shake the towers and councils of the great. How different is that from the film? This is the time when even the little people can do great things. Okay? Kind of removes the subtlety of Tolkien's own language. Because what is really being said here? What do we tend to think about the people who shape history? They're great. They're all what? Presidents, prime ministers, generals, etc. Are they? Who shaped history in the last week in Houston, in Beaumont, in Port Arthur, Texas? Was it Trump? Was it FEMA? They helped. I'm not dissing them at all. They helped. Who was it? It was even the National Guard. They helped. The National Guard did not do nearly as much help as men and women who lived 10, 20, 30, 100, 200, 500 miles away, who hitched up a boat to the pickup and drove down there. And then started going into the flooded areas and taking people out. If you saw the film Dunkirk, which is okay, I've not seen it, I've read a lot of reviews. Who saved the troops from Dunkirk? It was primarily men with small fishing boats and rowboats who went across the channel, took those over 300,000 troops off the coast of France and went back to England. It wasn't generals or admirals. Okay? Who of all the wise, Elrond says, could have foreseen it? But it's a heavy burden, and I won't make you go by yourself. So we get to chapter the ring goes up. Who's going to accompany Frodo? Well, who can you remove from his side? Sam. Who else? Gandalf. Merry and Pippin. We'll come to them in a moment. So Frodo, Sam, Gandalf. Boromir, because he's got to go back down that way anyways. Okay. Aragorn, because the ring closely concerns him. Why do Legolas and Gimli go? Is it punishment for Legolas for having let Gollum go? No, it's not. Because they represent their people. So the elves are represented and the dwarves are represented. And the last two to go are Merry and Pippin. What does Elrond want to do with Merry and Pippin?
Send them back to the Shire with news.
Send them back to the Shire with news. What kind of news? What purpose? To prepare. Prepare for what?
Oncoming war of Sauron's armies.
Yeah, but they're way up there in the north. What do they have to worry about that for? Because Elrond knows nothing is going to remain the same. Okay? But they go along with Frodo. Why? How? He says, trust to friendship rather than strength or might. Elrond wants to send a warrior, Glorfindel, somebody like that. Would Glorfindel be helpful, in the mines of Moria? Yeah, he would. He'd be really helpful. Okay? But what problem would Glorfindel have like in, entering Mordor? It'd be like turning on a searchlight. Okay? Trust to friendship. Now Gandalf says, trust to friendship. Elrond says, yeah, but the youngest one of these, Pippin. He's a little flighty. Gandalf says, no, him too. Okay. Are those words ironic?
Yes.
Why? What happens later?
Because in Moria, Pippin's like, I want to throw a rock in this
Okay,
tree.
yeah, we're going to skip everything to Mordor. So the ring goes south. Boromir blows his big horn and everything. They try to get over Caradhras, the mountain, and it won't let them. So they go by the mines of Moria. Aragorn tells Gandalf, beware. It's not me I'm worried about, it's you I'm worried about. They get to the doors of Durin, these hidden doors, shaped like this, and there's Elvish written on them. And the Elvish says, speak, friend, and enter. And Gandalf's like, damn, what is that password? I knew I should have written it down somewhere, And he finally hits on it. Speak, friend. No, it's not speak. It's say, friend. Melon in Elvish. And so he says, Melon, doors open. Right at that moment, what happens to Frodo? Yeah, octopus squid-like thing from the lake reaches out and grabs him. Okay? They rescue Frodo. They go on to the mines of Moria. What do they discover in the mines of Moria?
The remains of the Dwarven expedition.
They find the remains of Balin, or his tomb at least, okay, who was one of the dwarves that accompanied Bilbo 70-some years previously. They find his diary, his journal, and if you are granted access, to go to the Tolkien collection at Marquette University in Marquette, Wisconsin, you can see the actual Black Book of Mazarpool that they're reading from, because Tolkien made one up. The room is just amazing. They have all of the manuscripts of The Lord of the Rings. Tolkien sold it to them, I think, in 1957, 58, something like that, for, I think it was 10,000 pounds, because he had a big tax debt. He sold it for 10,000 pounds. That today is, would be worth many millions, okay? And you go in that room, and you see on the walls and stuff, well, this is how it was in 99 when I was there, drafts. You've got all the drafts. But he actually makes up this book. He drips blood on it. He puts burn marks on it to make it very accurate. All of the maps that he drew are on the wall. They've got smudges to indicate their age and such. But they read that and they get to the part, drums, drums, drums. And what does Pippin do that night when they bed down? Okay. He drops a pebble into the mine. Why does Peter Jackson change that in the movie? If you remember the movie, which I try not to, he sits on the sill of the well and knocks a skeleton in. Rather than, okay, put yourself in his shoes. He is like, he's in his tweens, so let's say 20, 21. But in our age, that's like 11, 12, 13. You're an 11-year-old. You find a well somewhere. What's the first thing that goes into your mind? How deep is this thing? And you know basic little laws of physics. You drop the rock. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005. Click. And what does Gandalf say? Fool of a took. This is no Hobbit, fun time exhibit or something. Next time, throw yourself in. I mean, he comes down hard. He hurts Pippin's feelings. No self-esteem, education here. So he tells Pippin, "You've got first watch." And then what does Gandalf do? Because he can't sleep, he goes and relieves him of that watch. And he starts to hear. It's not deep enough. That's not deep enough either. Boom, boom, boom. And he's like, "Oh, damn. That ain't natural." And they realize drums, 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 and the orcs attack. Okay? I didn't mention something. What does Bilbo give Frodo before they leave Rivendell?
His sword sting and a mithril ox.
His sword sting and the mithril coat, made by the dwarves, which is pretty much pierce-proof. How do we know? Because Frodo gets skewered by a mountain troll and is not hurt. Okay? The spear hits and bounces off. He gets a nasty bruise, like you would if you're wearing a Kevlar vest and get shot. Okay? So they make their way down to the bridge of Khazad-dûm. After Gandalf has to use a couple spells, bottom of 329. They're at the bridge. Legolas turns and he sees this thing that all the orcs are running from, and he gives a cry of dismay and fear. Two great trolls appear. They bore great slabs of stone, flung them down to serve as gangways over the fire. But it was not the trolls that had filled the elf with terror. The ranks of the orcs had opened. They crowded away as if they themselves were afraid something was coming up behind them. What it was could not be seen. It was like a great shadow, in the middle of which was a dark form, of man-shape maybe yet greater. And the power and terror seemed to be in it and to go before it. It came to the edge of the fire, and the light faded as if a cloud had bent over it. With a rush, it leaped across the fissure. The flames roared up to greet it. Its streaming mane kindled and blazed behind it. In its right hand was a blade like a stabbing tongue of fire. In its left, it held a whip of many thongs. And Legolas, a Balrog. Gimli, Durin's Bane. Gandalf, a Balrog. Oh, great. Now I understand. What an evil fortune, and I am already weary. The Balrog is what was behind the door. That when Gandalf put the spell on the door to close it, the Balrog issued a counter spell. And then Gandalf tells him he had to issue a word of command. And it's not like, stay. A word of command means he drains his, for lack of a better phrase, batteries. So he's pretty weak. Okay? Gandalf tells the others, get on the bridge. They go across, and he's left standing now. And he stands there. He holds his sword, Glamdring. You cannot pass. I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Aenor. Wielder of the flame of Aenor, that's Glamdring, that's the sword he's holding. Okay? But servant of the secret fire, that's not Manwë, chief of the gods. That's the secret fire that Eru Ilúvatar used in the creation of everything. Okay? You cannot pass. The dark fire will not avail you. Flame of Adun, go back to the shadow. You cannot pass. It doesn't listen. And then Gandalf pulls out Glamdring, and he says, you cannot pass. Aragorn sees Gandalf there, all alone, tiny little old frail guy, holding onto his staff, holding up his sword, and Aragorn starts to run back to him. He cannot stand alone. Elendil. Boromir runs after him. Gandalf lifts his staff, smacks it on the bridge shatters, the Balrog falls. But wait a second, I thought the Balrog had wings and could fly. Because the way it's almost always portrayed, it's got big giant wings. That's because in part of the description, it says it's like it had wings. Okay? But the Balrog falls. What does it do? With its whip, gets Gandalf around the legs and pulls him down, and Gandalf says, fly, you fools. And if you get on the internet, you can read a crazy, stupid, blank idea that somebody has come up with. What does Gandalf really mean when he says, fly, you fools? I can't remember who the idiot is, but he is an idiot. The idiot says, Gandalf is telling them how to get to Mordor. Right there.
What? It just means run. Just
Fly. How does Gandalf often get from one place to another when he's in a real bad pickle?
He flies away.
You, Gwaihir the Windlord, taxi. Find Gwaihir the Windlord, this person argues, and he will fly you straight to Mordor. Utterly ludicrous. He means, get the hell out of here. Okay? So they run. They go off to Lothlórien. How long do they spend there?
About a month or so.
Yeah, they can't really tell while they're there because time doesn't seem to pass in elven kingdoms. So they get there. They're tested by Galadriel and Celeborn when they are taken up to their tree houses. The word flet, by the way, it's an Old English word. It means floor. Okay? She kind of pierces their minds. They tell her that Gandalf fell, and she's kind of like, really? And so she starts to send out messengers. And in the chapter, The Mirror of Galadriel, she shows Frodo and Sam some, as Sam would call it, elf magic. Okay? Why is this significant? What do they see? What does Sam see when he looks in Galadriel's mirror? First, he sees it gets all dark, but what else? He sees the Shire. He sees his father, the old gaffer, walking down the road with his belongings tied up in a stick behind that he's got over his shoulder. He sees the party tree chopped down. He sees this big mill spewing out smoke. He sees Bagshot Row all dug up. And he's like, I got to go back. I got to stop this from happening. But he doesn't. Why not? Because he thinks I can't stay here. I must go home. They've dug up Bagshot Row and such. Page 363. Galadriel says, you cannot go home alone. You did not wish to go home without your master before you looked in the mirror, and yet you knew that evil things might well be happening in the Shire. Did he? Did he know that evil things might be happening? He knew that's a possibility. Did he think about it at all? No. Who did? Elrond. That's why he wanted to send Merry and Pippin back. Sam says, no, I'll go home by the long road with Mr. Frodo or not at all. But if I do make it back home, somebody's going to pay for it. So Frodo looks. What does he see? The eye. He sees the eye. Okay? And a few other things which we won't talk about. So Galadriel tells him, don't touch the water. And Frodo looks up and sees Galadriel. He offers her the ring, and she raises her arms up. And he realizes something. What does he realize about Galadriel?
She also has a ring.
She has one of the three. And she says, yes, you perceive it now. And she says, I know all the time what Sauron is thinking. And she says, I know what the other rings are doing too. And he offers it to her. And she says, you're offering me the ring in place of the Dark Throne. You put up a Dark Queen, etc., etc. But no. I will diminish and go into the West. Okay? So Frodo says, so I can use the ring. Why can't I see the others? You haven't tried. Not a good idea to say that to Frodo. Why? Because he doesn't have a strong enough will. Okay? So they get ready to leave Lórien. What does she give everybody? She gives them all gifts. What, for example, what does she give Boromir? Well, first of all, what do they all get from her? They get a cloak, which has a brooch or brooch to fasten it. limbus bread, like Cliff Bars, Elvish Cliff Bars, Galadriel bars, I guess you call them, or something like that. What did she give Boromir? A big old WWF, belt. Why? It's big, it's shiny, it's heavy. Cool. What does she give Aragorn? A sheath for his sword. Why? Yeah, the sword that's drawn from this sheath will never break. That's a pretty handy sheath to have for that particular sword, since it broke once before at an inopportune time. Okay, what does she give Legolas? Bow and arrows, if I remember correctly. What does she give Gimli?
3 strands of her hair.
And rope. Okay, 3 strands of her hair. But she doesn't give that to him initially. So let's go back for a minute. What does she give Sam? Sam gets rope. Merry and Pippin?
Silver belts.
Yeah, silver belts. Woo, big deal. Frodo.
Box of seeds.
Sam gets the box of seeds and dirt.
He gets his file.
He gets the file. Okay? The little glass jar with the stopper on it. Okay? That's attached to a chain that he can wear around his neck. What does it have in it? Water from the Mirror of Galadriel. Okay? But the Mirror of Galadriel only shows up when what is shining? A particular star, though. Okay? Star of Erendil. And what is that star that is actually shining? It is a Silmaril from Morgoth's crown that Beren, go back to the tale of Beren and Luthien, that Beren cut from the crown. Why did he cut the Silmaril from the crown? Because Luthien's father told him, you want to marry my daughter, bring me a Silmaril from Morgoth's crown. He goes, that's it? Man, you sell your daughter for cheap. Okay, I'll do that. And he brings it to him. He's actually dead by the time Thingol gets it, but the Silmaril is in his hand, which has been bitten off by a giant wolf. Okay, dog, actually. So it's the light from that Silmaril that shines into the water that makes it work. It's that light that is now in this file. Okay, it's going to be very, very important later on. So they all get this stuff, and then Gimli's there, and he's just kind of kicking his foot in the ground because he hasn't gotten anything. And she says, well, what would you want? I didn't know what to give you, Well, if I could, I would beg, just 3 strands from your hair. And the elves are like, that's it, he's dead. you don't touch the lady's life. That's like rape. Don't even think. And she's like, what in the world would you do with 3 strands of my hair? Really, it's not that. And he says, I would encase it in perfect crystal, and it would be our heirloom forever. It would be the greatest treasure. And she's like, Sam. Gimli. And so she gives it to him. Okay? So they go on the great river. Gollum is still following them. And we get to chapter, the breaking of the fellowship. Because they get to Parth Galen, which is just before the falls of Rauros. Frodo's got to decide what he's going to do. Boromir is going to Minas Tirith. Aragorn is supposed to go to Minas Tirith, because that's what he said he'll do. And Frodo says, give me an hour, so I can decide what I'm going to do. So he starts just walking off into the woods. They're almost, not quite, but they're within a couple hundred miles of the border of Mordor. Is it really a good idea to let Frodo go wandering? They've already seen there are orcs in the area. They've already had a Nazgul fly overhead once. Okay? So he goes off and wanders. And he slowly makes his way up this hill to the top of the hill. And Boromir shows up. What's Boromir there for?
He wants the ring.
Well, but what does he say? Oh, I didn't think it was a good idea for you to go wandering off alone. You need a man about to protect you. Talk about your patriarchal. And Frodo's like, well, thank you very much. Well, do you know what you're going to do? Yeah, I've got a pretty good idea, but I don't think anybody else is going to want to go along with us. So Boromir tries to take the ring. First he asks, then he tries to take it. What does Frodo do? Slips it on. Pisses Boromir off. And then he does what? Comes to himself. He comes to his senses. What does that mean? He puts off the temptation. See, it's the ring working through Boromir that is tempting him. Frodo, what have I done? I didn't mean it. I'm sorry. He runs back down, thinking Frodo is left. Frodo, meanwhile, is sitting up there on that carved chair. What does he see? Everything kind of takes on a new light. And he can see way the hell up in the north. He can see orcs coming out of the Misty Mountains. He can see the land of the Beornings on fire. Right? He sees riders of Rohan riding across the plains. He looks towards Mordor. And he sees the eye in the Tower of Barad-dûr. And the eye is like, it looks like it's almost sending out beams of light. Frodo's here. Barad-dûr is way over here. You know, and there's all this other stuff. Actually, Barad-dûr is here. And it's sending out this beam of light. It's going ding, ding, ding. What's it doing? It's triangulating. Every time it sends out a beam, it gets closer and closer. And so Frodo's sitting there, and he hears these voices, seemingly. Page 401. Very soon, it would nail him down. And he throws himself off the seat. Okay? Covering his head. And he hears himself crying out, "Never, never." Or was it, "Verily I come to you"? He's not sure which one of those he's actually saying. And then there's another flash from some other point of power that came to his mind. And another thought, "Take it off. Take it off, fool. Take it off. Take off the ring." And he does. Who is that? Or who do you think that is? Is it possibly Gandalf? Possibly. What is one indicator that it is Gandalf? He uses the word fool. Gandalf's the only one, really, in the course of the novel who calls anybody a fool. Pippin is a fool of a took. He calls Saruman a fool. Okay? But Gandalf's lost, right? So, the rest of the fellowship kind of scatter. Boromir comes down, tells Aragorn a little bit of what he did, not all of it. Aragorn's like, "We're going to talk about this later." Merry and Pippin run off. So Aragorn sends Boromir after Merry and Pippin. Then they hear the horn of Boromir. Legolas and Aragorn run off, and there's Sam. And Sam's left thinking what? What's Mr. Frodo going to do? And he starts running up the hill, and he thinks, I know what he's going to do. He's going to leave. He's going to leave me like hell. Runs back to the boats. And so he and Frodo head off by themselves in a boat. That's why it's the breaking of the fellowship. Notice how broken it is. Merry and Pippin off one way with Boromir chasing them. Legolas and Aragorn off one way. Yeah, Legolas and Aragorn and Gimli, yeah. And Frodo and Sam off on their own. So when we pick up at the two towers, we get these separate strands. Okay? And we're not going to hear from Frodo and Sam until the second half of the two towers, but it's going to take us back to this point in the novel. But a whole bunch of time passes in the first half. Okay, we'll stop there. So, two towers on Tuesday. Probably about the first half